podcast. I'm John Losey, your host and guide, as we explore how we can be present and kind as we do great things. You can find the Living Life Juicy podcast on YouTube. You can also find it on all the podcast platforms if you just want the audio part of it. You can explore more about what I do and we do at the Into Wisdom Group by going to intowisdomgroup.com. And also, I got to be sure that I plug my own book here, The Pottery Panda. You can buy it on Amazon, but you get a better price on potterypanda.com. So today, our guest is Daniel Cate. With his work in experiential education, outdoor adventures, leadership, and a Ph.D. in psychology with a focus on creativity, he's become known as the creativity doctor. His new book, 300 plus uses for an Nalgene bottle, he just told me it's the first in a series he's going to put out on these 300 plus. It was released in August. We met through mutual friends in the experiential education world, but I'll let him tell you more about who he is and what he does. So right now, welcome, Daniel. I'm so glad that you're here and you're able to join us.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. As soon as you we met through mutual friends, then they said, hey, you got to have Daniel on your podcast. And then when it was about creativity, it just made me that much more excited. And I want to get in a great conversation about creativity, what it is, how you get it, who has it, who doesn't, all that stuff. But first, I want to know a little bit more about you. And first thing I ask always is, how do you explain to somebody who's never met you what you do?
I teach the subject of creativity. I teach the subject of creativity, and I try to make it as simple as possible for people. And I try to make it practical as possible. And so my main focus is kind of breaking creativity down. I call them concepts or vocabulary. They're not specific to creativity, but things like divergent thinking, combining ideas, limitations. These are all aspects of creativity that I hope for people to be able to identify and almost put their fingers on. So instead of creativity being this abstract, mythological phenomenon that happens, it's something that we do on a daily basis, and we can be intentional about it. So I'm trying to show people. Let me back up a second. My degree is in humanistic psychology. So that's things that everyone has already within us, and we try to bring out the best in people. So the way that applies to creativity is that the creativity I'm teaching is skills or abilities that we all have, and it's things that we do on a daily basis, but we don't recognize that. So if we're not able to identify it, then we can't acknowledge it and celebrate it and talk about it. So that's what I'm trying to do, is teach the subject of creativity, and I can talk more about.
Yeah. So what I hear is that, and in my language, it would be, first of all, you can only manage that which you're aware of. And if you're not aware that you are a creative being, then you can't do it on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's a huge effects of that too, because if I don't believe I'm creative, it's kind of like if you don't believe you're intelligent, you're not going to live up to your full potential. If you don't believe you're creative, there's going to be those little processes through the day that, like you said, if you can identify that I'm facing a limitation right now, then you can better manage that. It's not, oh no, this is terrible. You recognize that as this is an opportunity for me to be creative and to try something different. And so it reframes how you approach that problem. So that definitely makes sense. When you understand it, you can definitely better manage it.
Yeah, I'm a big Paul Simon fan and also Malcolm Gladwell fan. And they did basically a musical autobiography of Paul Simon in an audiobook called Miracle and Wonder. Okay. And there's a clip on there that says Paul Simon's on Dick Cavett, the guy who used to host the Tonight Show back in the 60s. And Dick Cavett asks him, how do you know when you're stuck? Because stuckness is, he was talking about being stuck on riding bridge over troubled waters. How do you know when you're stuck? He says, I'm stuck when every path I go down takes me to a place I don't want to go. And his
Mhm.
secret about that, and you talked about limitations, is that he never questioned his ability to find a new path.
Mm.
So there's this idea of, you know what, I'm not where I want to be. Let me choose another path, and continuing until it hit a place he wanted to be. And
Absolutely.
I love that definition of stuckness, because
Hmm.
that's how it really feels to me. And then you look at the man's career, and like huge in the 60s and 70s. But if you look, and even in the 80s with Graceland and those, he's still putting out great music.
Hmm.
And he's always gone kind of, he's not happy with just being famous and popular. In fact, he did a Broadway play that just bombed.
Hmm.
And he looks back at that as a reset. And
Yep.
so yeah. I want to find out a little bit more, because I know you've been in some new, you've had a unique path. And I
Yeah.
want to hear kind of your origin story. How did you get to being the creativity doctor? Where did you start? Where did it end? You don't have to start when you're a baby, but wherever it makes sense to start.
Yeah. Well, I've always been a creative person, and I've always, yeah, been pretty creative. I've always been that person that people know, he's going to come up with a, a unique or creative idea. Um, and growing up, I was like a straight laced guy. Like I was in the military. So I was like, I knew how to follow orders and do the right thing. And I'm a weird guy. I'll admit it. And I didn't really accept that weirdness yet. But like as I went on through life, I actually, when I was an undergrad, I started drawing caricatures. And one experience that really shaped a lot of how I saw myself, and learning new things or diving into a new task was related to that. So when I started, my dad had got me a book when I was about 12 years old, and I ignored it for like 10 years. And then I had a part-time job where I started drawing people I worked with, and I wasn't that great. And so the next summer I sat out on the street and I drew caricatures for free, and I accepted tips and kind of got into it. And then the next summer I moved out to California and I got a job at Universal Studios, doing caricatures there. And that was awful. I'm not trying to be modest, but I was like the worst artist there. And I'm fine with that. But I had the best time of my life. And I came back the next summer. There's a long story behind that. But I came back the next summer and I was still one of the least talented artists, but I was one of the top five salespeople every week. And so I learned how to, like, I went from being like the worst person, literally, and that's okay, to being like one of the best salespeople. And it was just, I learned how to, to kind of be, to accept or embrace that poor work, I guess. I don't want to say like crappy work, but, I
Yeah. I
embraced
heard
it.
somebody call it embrace the suck.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Yeah, embrace the suck. So, and that's what I did. And for whatever reason, when I was doing caricatures, like I just had this confidence, and I didn't have all that doubt from everything else. And so that's really inspired me in other things I do, especially when I try something new. I kind of draw back on that, look at where I started and where I came from. So then I got my master's degree in experiential education, and I was still creative. I love facilitating in creative ways. I Because it hurts me and my soul when somebody presents something in a dull or like an emotionless way where they're not excited about it, or it's like they haven't really thought it through. So yeah, definitely embrace creativity through experiential education. Um, Fast forward a few years, I started looking at PhD programs, and I knew that experiential education was creative, but I didn't know how. And at the time, I had absolutely no idea what creativity was compared to what I know now. And so, as I started studying creativity, I became more creative and I became more comfortable with my creativity. And that's something that happens with people as they learn to be creative. Like or as you learn more about creativity, you become creative. There was a guy at a conference who said the best way to become more creative is to learn about creativity. And so during that time, I feel like I became more authentic. and more confident about my creativity. And I see creativity everywhere in everything. And so I finally finished my degree, and I was ready to find a new name for my company. And so the Creativity Doctor seemed appropriate, and starting off with a bang with my new book.
So I'm curious about how your work with caricatures informed your work as a facilitator in experiential programs. How did it make you better, or did it create limitations? Tell me
Yeah,
about that.
maybe better. It so it gives me, when you draw caricatures at a park, first off, caricatures they can be sensitive because you're drawing somebody's face, and people are very sensitive about their faces and self-conscious. So people are going to be a little more reactive to them, or they're going to have a lot more feedback than you might expect. And so you get people like, this is terrible, you're a horrible human being. You get people like, that looks nothing like me, or that looks like so and so that doesn't look like me, all this stuff. And also, like, you can hear people behind you talking and they don't realize it, but you can hear them saying, like, what is that, or that looks awesome, or stuff like that. And so you build thick skin, and you begin to, like, when I draw caricatures, I'm an entertainer. Like, I'll talk to the person I'm drawing, but I'll also talk to people behind me. And so it just kind of, it keeps you going. It makes you aware. I'm good at improv. It makes you a better improviser, facilitating. But again, it's just that when you're a caricature artist, like, your abilities are on display. Everything that you do is on display. And so when you're a facilitator, it's the same way. You're up in front of this group, and they're seeing everything you do, and they see things you don't see. And so it gave me that confidence to be able to have the thick skin, I think, to be able to take feedback or handle people's reactions, or to improvise and to improve the situation. But I learned a lot of stuff from caricatures. Just being open. Openness is like one of the main things for creativity. It's the main indicator for creative potential. So I learned to be open to try new things. Plus, when you draw caricatures, you make mistakes all the time, and you're drawing a marker, so you can't just erase them. You might be able to start over, but you don't want to do that. And so also just working with mistakes and accepting them. And I'll tell people, like, oh, I made a mistake right here, this is terrible. And then, I'll move on. I don't care.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So tell me
that's
this: how did being a facilitator of experiential programs and adventure inform your understanding of creativity when you started to study it?
mm. So creativity and experiential education have a lot of similarities. One of the So in creativity, there's the 4 P's of creativity. There's the product, the process, press or environment, and the person. And so those all actually translate basically the same into experiential education. So with the person, experiential educators are creative. We're open to making mistakes. We're open to failure. We follow a process. We're not afraid to take risks, and all these other creative characteristics that you would find in a creative person. So the P for person and creativity, it describes the personality. So handles adversity, or takes advantage of adversity and comes back stronger. Sensitivity to surroundings and observation and things like that. So those are the same with experiential education. I'll skip the product. The environment is the same. For creativity, it helps to have a safe environment that's judgment free, that is, democratic, where everyone has a part, everyone can be heard, and is safe to try new things. It's safe to try new ideas, and it's safe to express your emotions and be who you are. So that's the same in experiential education and the same in creativity. And then both have a process as well. The creative process is less defined as the experiential education process. If you go by Kolb's process, you have concrete experience, reflection, observation, abstract conceptualization, and then active experimentation. And so that same stuff is present in creativity. So there's tons of overlap between the two fields.
Okay. I'm curious because I don't have the PhD, but I was forced into it while I worked at a large corporate university because their big theme was innovation.
Mm-hmm.
But then they would describe how you describe creativity. And so I actually wrote a white paper on kind of what the difference is.
Mm-hmm.
And then also engaged a former Imagineer and used his process, and we adapted it to a corporate environment. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious about your thoughts. What is the difference between creativity and innovation?
That is a great question, and I love the fact that you identified that. There is a lady, her name is Tina Seelig, and she's a professor at the Stanford Design School. And one way she describes it is that it begins with imagination. And so imagination is seeing something that is not there. Imagination is seeing something original. Imagination is seeing alternatives or possibilities. We use that imagination to help us be creative. And creativity is the application of imagination. So when we're being creative, we're taking those ideas, those images in our heads, and we're actually creating the physical product or the process, and we're enacting our imaginations. And then innovation is when, if that creativity works and if it affects the entire field. So it's not just I'm going to come up with this really creative drawing or this really creative product tomorrow, and I'm going to call it innovative. Like I don't even know if it's creative yet. I don't know if people have accepted it. I don't know if it has a use. And there's also different definitions or levels of creativity. But let's say it is creative and it works and 5 people love it. That's creative. It's not an innovation yet. But let's say it catches on and then it changes the industry and everybody else is using this new technique or this new product. That's where innovation is. Everybody wants innovation, but nobody wants creativity.
Well, yes, and you can't get to innovation without creativity. And I would push back that creativity doesn't have the requirement of being useful or even appreciated. If you talk to great writers, artists, musicians, they're the ones who are focusing on just creative combinations of things. And like what you said, I like that definition, application of imagination. But at that point, it doesn't have to be useful. Well, I want to get into divergent and convergent thinking a little bit. But when you get into to me, innovation and why people want innovation is because it has either disrupts the industry, it has usefulness to your client or to whoever your audience is. And so while creativity can be wild and crazy, it doesn't have to touch reality at all. For it to be innovative, it has to touch a customer, client, or industry. That's how I think about it.
Yeah. And you touched on a good point, that usefulness. And so, like I said, there's different definitions of creativity. People who are more objective or quantitative, I guess, let me back up. Researchers agree that in order for something like a product, I'm just going to say this, in order for a product to be creative, it needs to be new and useful. So that's an objective. That's a very objective way of looking at it. New and useful can be, subjective. But in order for it to be creative, I think on a bigger societal level, it needs, sounds terrible. In order to call it a creative product, it must be new and useful in that sense. So let me give you an example. In the 1950s, there were 2 engineers, and they got the idea to create 3D wallpaper by fusing together shower curtains. And it didn't work. Nobody wanted it. So it was new, but it wasn't useful. So it's creative in a different sense. Like it's not that objective creativity, but it's the creative process. There's personal creativity that they're using, which is a whole nother. Personal creativity is new and meaningful. So that's I think a lot of the creativity that people have in mind when they think of creativity. But anyway, so it didn't work. They tried to rebrand it as greenhouse insulation, and that didn't work. A few years later, when IBM was ready to send out their first shipment of computers, they needed to package them safely somehow. And somebody remembered that idea of 3D wallpaper, and it worked. And that's where bubble wrap comes from. So the first two iterations were new, but they weren't useful yet. They weren't, I don't want to say accepted by society.
They were solutions in search of a problem.
Yeah. And really, that definition of creativity that I just described, I hate to say it, but it's not that important. For me, at least, for what I do. One of the best explanations of creativity, let me see if I can say it right. It comes from a lady named Dr. Cindy Burnett from the International Center for Studies in Creativity. And she says something to the effect of creativity is more than just coming up with new solutions. It's a mindset and approach to everything we do in life. And I forgot what she said in the middle, but it takes authenticity, openness, and curiosity. And that is true, because as creativity should be more how we approach life. It's not something that, all right, I'm going to be creative. I'm going to turn on the switch. I'm done. I'm going to turn it off. And so if we're open, we're not going to be as, it's just like a door. If you have a barn door open, lots of things can come in and out. But if you have a regular door, or let's say you have a dog door, you're not going to get much in there. And we're the same way. Our minds, like, everything's coming in. Some things are, going out, or they're just kind of noise. It stays in your mind. It might not have any purpose at the moment, but it might have purpose later. But if we're more open, we're going to see a lot more possibilities and opportunities. There's actually a study, I don't know who did it, I can't cite it, but they found that people who are luckier tend to look for things more. They look for more opportunities. Whereas people who are unlucky, they're just kind of closed off, and they're not gonna like, oh, somebody just hand me $100. Crap, I need
it actually is Carol Dweck's stuff on growth mindset is about stepping into a situation, not looking for the things you know, but looking for the things you don't know. And that's what I talk about, a beginner's mindset. All that kind of stuff is all about, and this gets into, I know you talked to a mutual friend, Mike Brennan, who just put out a book on daily creative habits. And I have that habit type of thing, is that creativity isn't something that you have up on the shelf and can pull down. It's a habit that you cultivate. And same thing, I've got I do these free lunch and learn workshops, and I got one coming up it's called Practical Creativity. And we look at 5 habits for creativity and 5 habits for practicality. And usually creative people have no problem doing divergent thinking and coming up with great stuff, but they can't land the plane. And you have another group of people who tend to be, man, give me something, I can make it happen, but don't make me make it up. And so individually, you need both. If you want to increase your innovative power, you need both creativity and practicality, and you integrate those. If you're talking about a team, you need to make sure that both of those habits, or both those sets of habits, are being practiced if you want to land a plane. And that's the biggest hit against brainstorming. Is that's a friend of mine, Craig McNair Wilson, is the former Imagineer. He says brainstorming is usually characterized as playful arguing with snacks. I love that, because the biggest pushback is that it tends not to land the plane. It doesn't get to activity. And that's what I liked about his book called, it's basically, the subtitle is How to Brainstorm Like Theme Park People. It's Imagineering. And what I liked about it is it had really practical insights. Number one, it's all about, you're creative. We unlearn creativity, we don't learn it. And there's lots of research about that. And so you are creative. Now let's step in, and here's a process that will not only generate divergent thinking, generate a bunch of ideas, but also help you converge or do some critical thinking around it. That's when, creative thinking, you need to get rid of all the limitations, and there's no judgment, and you put it all out there. It's all about quantity, not quality. But when you turn the corner and start to converge, that's when you need to apply. And the ideas can suck at that stage.
Yeah.
But it's got to be the idea, not the person. And there's
Yeah.
lots of great ways to converge those ideas into the best one or two.
So
So
there's something called the creative problem solving, and it's a process. And you mentioned something that has in it. So it's got four steps. It's got clarifying, where you clarify the problem that you want to solve. It's got ideating, where you come up, that's brainstorming. It's got coming up with a plan. I forgot what the word is, where you come up with a plan and a strategy, and then it's got execution. And so actually each one of us has a strength in one of those. Some people are great at asking questions and clarifying. I'm a great ideator. When people ask me questions, it used to get under my skin. Now I understand why they're asking questions, but I'm like, why are you questioning my ridiculous ideas? And then there's people who can like see the strategy and the plan work out, and they're best at that. And then there's others who are like just great at taking that and putting it into action. So we just talked about, yes, definitely some people are better at ideating. Some people are great at executing and clarifying.
implementation and
yeah, absolutely.
So, and now when I started doing this, and we were training our leaders in the corporate university on this. It was called quality thinking process, which involved what we called creative thinking. And that's where McNair came in and offered. He said, hey, we took his concepts and applied them, but the important thing was to identify what are we doing here? Are we divergent thinking or convergent thinking? Are we framing, or are we coming up with a plan? And it just, so as we did those things, and this probably the most crucial insight I walked away from as I was training leaders, and we called it how to get the best thinking from your people. We found out that the conversations when we debrief that experience, because I am who I am and I had to debrief the training, we found that it fostered inclusion better than any specific diversity, inclusion, equity program, because one of the things we did is we didn't have a note taker. Everybody had a pen in their hand and access to the paper. That meant that nobody was interpreting your ideas. You were doing it directly. And we created space for the people who aren't quick thinkers. We allowed that. And that was another big knock against brainstorming, is that it skews towards spontaneous, outgoing, expressive people. Well, we tried to create a space for all the different types: introverts, extroverts, processors, that kind of stuff.
And what did you do? How did you create that?
The space?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things is that so some of the, what I would say, the process, you need to prime the pump, which means send out the frame, what you or the leadership has decided, this is what we want to work on. Send that out early so that people have a chance to process it. And now the extroverts tend to not look at that until they walk into the room. The introverts have been sweating over it for days. Then you walk in and you say, this is what we want to work on. How can we refine this? So the people who say, well, that frame sucks, have a chance to input. So the group that's actually going to be working on it get to reframe it. We also mix in. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say that does more than just, it gives everybody time to kind of let the idea incubate. But and then real quick, there's another way to do it anonymously. If you have people write down ideas on note cards or sticky notes, then nobody knows who wrote what, and so those introverts get their.
Oh, and we like implement when we're doing divergent thinking. First of all, we allow time and space. Like we say, all right, want to what we call clear the pipes. So I want you to write down and you can do competitive thinking. You can do and competitive thinking is like timed or space or number, like what you did with 300. You can say, all right, before we get going, I want everybody to write down the first 10 ideas that come to their head and put it on the butcher paper, or you can do it in 3x5 cards, or you can do it Post-its.
Yeah, I like that.
And that just clears the decks. And then you say, okay, take a look at all this kind of stuff. And I want you to take a couple of minutes just to look around and see. And that, you can plus it, or you can piggyback on any of these ideas. That helps the introvert people who like couldn't come up with 10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now they're able to process it and get their best thinking out in the next round.
And they're also able, another thing I love about when you're divergent thinking and you have the no judgment part, or what you're saying, where like everybody gets to see people's ideas, you start to see how people think more similarly than you do. I mean, you see there are those, there's really creative people who come up with surprising things. And then there's those people who maybe don't see themselves as being super creative. I feel like they come up with the best stuff. Like they come up with way better ideas than I can. I'm like, it's amazing. Forgot what was going on that too. I need to stop getting
but if you got the people who are successful by volume and they throw 100 ideas out there and a couple of them are like really quality, you have the people who succeed through patience and processing, where they're quiet, but the two things that they say the whole day are the nuggets.
Yeah.
And neither, you can't exist. One can't exist without the other.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of activities. So I broke it down, and you talk about lateral thinking a lot. And I'd like to hear more about your thoughts about, like, what is lateral thinking? Where did that come up from? Tell me a little bit about your approach to lateral thinking.
So I guess first, what is your definition? What do you envision when you think of lateral thinking?
Well, I go to De Bono's book called Lateral Thinking.
Oh, okay.
And it's this idea of you, if you start from a different place on the same problem, you'll end up with new. I do a word picture. So imagine you wake up in the morning and you're gonna go to work, but there's a helicopter up front, and you get in the helicopter and they fly you across town, and there's a car there. You can still get to work, but you pass different things.
Right.
And that sparks different thoughts and ideas. So with lateral thinking, what you do is you're still dealing with the same issue. I like to, there's another thing about picturing success, but you're dealing with the same thing, but you're starting from a different place. And as you go back, your brain will return to that, but the neural pathway will be different. And in that neural pathway, you'll switch what you see, which means that you'll generate new, different, sometimes sucky, sometimes great ideas.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, definitely. So there's the 4 guidelines of divergent thinking, and the second one is to think of wild and crazy ideas. And I think that the farther away you go from what is the actual problem, if you can find information from the farthest away, that's where you're going to come up with the most creative ideas. And there's another theory. It's called generativity theory, and the guy says there's four components or 4 principles of intentionally being creative. And one thing is changing your environment. So going a different route to work, or even switching your office around, so you're going to see new things from a different perspective. And another one is to learn things that are unrelated to anything you care about. So if I love gardening, I'm going to go read about guns and ammo. And so the idea is that you're going to pick up those little tidbits of information, kind of like what you're saying. And so I love going off track, nothing related to what we're talking about, like what's going on. And it works. And there's an example is the Japanese bullet train, kind of. So the Japanese bullet train goes a couple 100 miles an hour. And when they first designed it, it would make this really loud boom when it went through tunnels. And because the train goes along villages and things like that, it was disruptive. And so they're trying to solve the problem. And one day, one of the guys working on it, he's a bird watcher. And he's out there watching how the kingfisher bird dives. And he sees how the kingfisher bird hunts and when he dives into the water. And so he took that idea and applied it to the Japanese bullet train, and it solved the problem. So definitely need to go down unexpected paths. And there's a book called Expect the Unexpected or It Will Never Happen. And so, I'm all about that.
Yeah. And a couple of things. You're just generating so many thoughts for my, there's a book called Loon Shots. which is basically a lot of the things that we thought of as instant success were not even close. And so what loon shots are basically ideas that have been panned in the past, but all of a sudden became relevant, and people went back and said, this will work here. And that's that idea that you have, like, a lot of what people bring me in if they want to do this practical creativity process. They have a problem they want to solve. And the very first thing that I do is shift from thinking about problems and issues to success. What will it look like if it's working? And that's the first frame and brainstorm that we do. But then that's like a problem in search of an answer. And a lot of what creativity, just pure creativity, is we find answers in search of a problem. And you can talk about like silly putty was going to be a replacement for rubber in World War II, but they didn't find any use for it. And then it became a toy. Then it became a useful tool in space missions for sticking tools to the side of spaceships. The whole 3M experiment. 3M has done this a bunch of times with Post-it notes and other products that they have. I mean, Post-it notes was because the guy was looking for an adhesive, and he found one that didn't really work. It just worked for a little bit, and that turned into Post-it notes.
Yeah. You have to be open to whatever comes along. What you just said reminded me of something. It's called Shindogu, Chindogu, and it's the Japanese art of unuseless items. And so the history of it is there was an engineer who was publishing in this magazine, and he had some pages to fill up in the back. And so what he did was he came up with these products. They were just kind of like over the top. And so Shindogu is, in order for a product to be Shindogu, it has to be useful, but not practical. So there's like 10 guidelines. Basically, if somebody would use it on a daily basis, if you sell it or if somebody would buy it as a product, it's no longer Shindogu. So they have like a...
Yeah, it sounds like Sudoku is Japanese for MacGyver.
Kind of, yeah. And so they have like a butter, kind of like a glue stick, except they have butter in it, so you can like butter your bread with a glue stick. They have a pair of shoes that one side is a broom and the other one is a dustpan. And so it's practical, like it would work, but nobody's going to use that. And then there's another one where this guy or somebody created this long stick, and this is in, I think, 1986. So somebody created this long stick, and you attach your camera to it, and then it's got a button that you push, so you can like put this long stick out there and like take a picture of yourself. And so that was Shindogu. Nobody's going to use that. And then of course now we have selfie sticks.
Right.
So that's a great example of how this was like a intentionally impractical object that became practical. Yeah.
Good stuff. So before I want to get into like a lightning round type of thing, but so divergent thinking is this idea of, when I put it out there, the thing that you want in divergent thinking is, again, volume, wild and crazy. And I put it this way. So seeking volume and then seeking variety is that wild and crazy, and rewarding people for these ideas that are like, Craig McNair Wilson tells a story about their brainstorming. Bakery is brainstorming marketing options, and somebody says, "What if we put a donut on the moon?" And the idea itself is wild and crazy, and like, we can't do that. That's just too expensive. And they turned to the CFO, and he said, "If we can put a donut on the moon, that'd be worth every penny we'd spend on it." And they didn't get a donut on the moon, but they did get donuts on the space shuttle.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's that second and third iteration of, as you refine these ideas, that's the convergent thinking part, with saying, don't toss out the extremes. And right. Think Better is a book, and I can't remember who the author is, but he talks about the different areas. Basically, you have like the first level, which is the stuff you've already thought of. The second level that you have, first third is what you've already thought of. Second third is the idea of, I've heard of people think of this. The third is where you want to get divergent thinking to, which is the stuff that nobody's ever thought of before. And to me, the goal of the divergent thinking or brainstorming, whatever, is get to that third.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that's where most of the time nothing comes of that. But the things that break industries and that disrupt all come from the third.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to hear, just real quickly, I want to hear your thoughts about convergent thinking.
That's awesome. I've always waited for somebody to ask me that, and nobody's ever asked me that in a workshop. For one thing, I don't really focus on it as much. And I can't really give any advice on convergent thinking. I focus on divergent thinking. I know that's really one-sided of me. I don't.
Well,
good question.
On your side is that tends to be when you go into businesses, mm-hmm. that tends to be where they lack competency, is in divergent thinking, or in what I would say there's two types of creative thinking. And that's it's all divergent. It's about getting the volume out there. And mm-hmm. the first part is what I would call lateral thinking, which is this idea of, the pure lateral thinking. We would go on, when I do coaching, we go on excursions. Based on, so I'll talk with people. I was coaching this one person who was having to put together a big product launch plan, and she was stuck. I don't know where to start. But in our conversation, I found out she's a gardener. I just asked, how, you don't just plant a garden, don't you plant it? Yeah, I plant a garden. How do you plant the garden? And she started listing all these things, and all of a sudden you saw the light bulb go off and go, oh, mm-hmm. This is just like planting a garden. And that happened because we started in a different spot that tapped into her expertise that she can transfer then. We, do things like that. You can go to, let's say you're working with employee engagement, and you say, all right, let's pretend we're on the snowboarding planet. How would you do engagement in a snowboarding planet? And again, it's just asking them to start from a different place.
Yeah.
Now, when I do, then I do what I call competitive thinking, which is where kind of what you did with the book, which is competitive. You can use time, mm-hmm. and we'll blow up. You have 5 minutes to write down as many ideas as you can, and the only rule is you can't stop writing. Space. Here's a flip chart page. Your job as a group is to fill this flip chart page with ideas. Mm-hmm. You can have number, which is what you did, 300, usually I'll do in a brainstorming, a couple of times during a brainstorming part, during the divergent thinking part, I'll say, all right, what I want you to do is everybody really quick, come up with 10 new ideas. And they write it down. You're not done until you have 10. They don't have to be good. They just have to be ideas. And so the combination of competitive thinking and lateral thinking and hopping back and forth, mm-hmm. if they come up in that first little bit, they come up with maybe 10 ideas. Yep. But by the time you've hopped back and forth, you've generated literally dozens, if not hundreds, of ideas, mm-hmm. Just because there was a guided process. And this is why having a facilitator, mm-hmm. when you haven't developed the habits, having a facilitator is so helpful in these things. So then you get flip the board a little bit, and you got convergent thinking, which mm-hmm. in a lot of ways is quality or critical thinking. Is taking this massive group of ideas and getting down to the best one or two. Because you can never, having 3, 4, 5 ideas is impractical. Mm-hmm. So what you do is there's all kinds of ways to do it. The first thing that you have is your frame. When you've defined it as success, you start asking yourself, which of these is going to lead us to success? And mm-hmm. you can start to pull things back. The process I call grab, group, and grow, which is basically a lot of the ideas will be similar. So which ones how can you cluster them to similar ideas? And mm-hmm. then you can reuse them, I don't give the limitation at only one spot, but you usually end up, when you cluster like that, you can take hundreds of ideas and you come up with anywhere between 4 to 7 clusters.
I like that. I never.
Then you uniquely, you encourage them not to name the clusters until you're way down the line. Mm-hmm. And you say, take a look at all those cards, and I want you to name that cluster. And it's not defined by the name, it's defined by the cluster it represents.
Yep.
And then you have a couple of great ways. Once you have that, you've limited it to that many. There's like a tool that I call, you ever Deadliest Catch?
No.
Crabbers or fishing. You have a scale that tells you whether it's legal to bring in or whether you have to release it. Well, your scale is your frame. Mm-hmm. And you hold up each idea, each cluster to that frame. And if it fits, you keep it. If it doesn't, you pass it along. Now you can also do the optometrist test, where you take A or B, A or B, B, okay, B or C, B or C, and you just do that optometrist stress. You're basically forced prioritization.
Yeah, I like that. I
By
like
far,
that.
my favorite one is called the Platonic Triangle, and it's not Play-Doh, it's Plato, the thinker. And what it is you take, let's say there's 5, and you put those 5 at the all lined up. And if you have 3x5, it's great because it's very tactile. Put them all down there, and you say, all right, there's only room for 4 at the next level. Which one stays behind? You're not trying to decide which one's best. You're saying these are all great ideas. Which one stays behind? Now you've got 4. Oh, there's only room for 3 at that level. Which one stays behind?
I like that.
And then you get it up, and now you've got a prioritized list of ideas to pursue. That becomes your next frame.
I love that idea. Love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've never realized how little I've facilitated convergent thinking when you said that, but yeah, I've always focused.
Yeah, I'll send you a copy of a simple book on practical creativity that not only has like my process and stuff, it has links to a whole link of convergent thinking activities and divergent thinking activities. I'll send that to you. Add it to your resources, your vast resources. You've gifted me with a couple of books I need to look into. So
yeah, and something else I was going to say is, with divergent thinking, there's 4 guidelines that we have to follow, or we don't have to follow them, but we should follow. The first one is to not judge the ideas. And I think you've kind of talked about that. We're just coming up with ridiculous ideas, and we don't say that's worked before, or that was a failure before, or that's impossible, we can't do it. Because once somebody does that, that just kills that. That just dams that creative flow, and it kills the safety too. Because like, I'm an introvert, I'm gonna start thinking, man, this guy over here is gonna be a jerk and judge every idea I think of. So, and my ideas are crazy. I don't come up with logical things.
Yeah.
And then the other one, like you said, wild and crazy ideas, because they can lead to whatever, like surprising solutions. And then quantity over quality. And then the last one is to build on each other's ideas. Because a lot of times we're afraid, like we take ownership of the idea, but if you offer an idea and then I build on that, and that's like my idea's the final idea, you contributed just as much as I did by giving the initial idea. Yeah. And also, when leadership is in the room, if you're my boss, I don't want to, like, I might be hesitant because I may think you have the best ideas because you're the boss, which is completely wrong. But I might be hesitant to build on your idea. So yeah. And then something else I was going to say is, there's actually ways that we can prime the brain for divergent thinking. If we create something called a schema violation, where we do something familiar in a different way, that actually causes cognitive flexibility. And so in the study where they did it, they had people made a common sandwich, but in a different way. And just by doing that simple task, because the brain has to think, I like to have people sign their names 3 times using the non-dominant hand, because that is just like your brain's going crazy. Something else is, I like to create cognitive dissonance. There's an activity, but I just realized that if somebody's listening to this, they wouldn't be able to get it. But yeah, there's definitely things you can do to prime the brain for divergent thinking as well.
Yeah, and the whole idea between all those things is to identify the limits of your thinking and then step beyond it. And the very first thing is, we don't think there's limits to our thinking, but as soon as, like, the cognitive dissonance and the schema violation is all about saying, oh, where is my edge? And this is why failure is so important. Failure is not bad. It's an indicator of where you need to grow. And failure, when you reach failure in the way that you're thinking, you have to go out and explore new ways to think. And I think that's like the mechanism of what you're talking about.
Definitely. Yeah. And so in my dissertation, it was titled Experimenting Despite Outcomes. And people try to change some course of their lives despite the fact that they knew they could fail. And one of the things I found that was interesting from the outcomes is that some people said they were unsuccessful, and then there was the word failure. And so there's a difference between being unsuccessful and failing. And in this case, failing, people define failing as you don't try again, or you fail if you don't reframe the experience. So let's say I tried to become the best comedian ever in 1 week, and I didn't do it. If I don't try again, I fail, and that's not a bad thing. Sometimes we fail, we can't try again, and that's okay. Like failure, like you said, it is not a bad thing. Failure is great. But if I did try again, that would have been considered unsuccessful, which is, that's fine. I'll just try again.
Right.
Or if I don't look back on it and say, you know what, that was a pretty crazy idea to be a comedian in a week, like become the world's best, and I can learn from it. And then, that's what we do in experiential education, is you learn from it and you carry that information forward. So yeah, there's definitely a difference between failure and being unsuccessful as well.
I think like one of my things is destigmatizing the word failure, because there's people who go different. I will never talk about failure. It's just being unsuccessful or a learning point or whatever. It's like, no, don't avoid it.
Yeah.
Because people know you're avoiding it. What you do is you just redefine it and you say, okay, failure is a data point.
Yeah.
And we talk about, like, so I'll use the example of snipers. Okay, they always go out in pairs.
Yep.
And the first one shoots, and the second one tells him how he missed. And that's the idea, is missing isn't the point. Missing is failing. You're not hitting the bullseye, but you need that feedback to tell you how you missed so you can make adjustments.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's, I love the fact that you're destigmatizing failure. I love that. In fact,
absolutely.
But I want to make sure that we're good about our time here. We got plenty of time, by the way, but I love the conversation, and we could do our just one thing on just the creative process and the innovation process. So lightning round, I want you to give an answer. You're not signing a contract, so you don't have to live with this answer the rest of your life. It's just what comes to your mind first. The first one, what is your favorite book or media to give as a gift?
Oh, to give as a gift. The Leader Who Is Hardly Known.
Okay. You know what? You're the second person this season who's talked about that.
It's a good book. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely on my list. It's probably going to be a Audible book first. My process is you go Audible, and then if it sticks with me, then I get the paperback, because of the margins. I can have a conversation with it. If it really hits me, it becomes hardcover worthy. But
yeah,
all right, great. The Leader Is Hardly Known. Now I've adapted this question. My next question is, who are your heroes? But I've talked with a bunch of people who say, I don't have one hero, because they all have great parts, but they also all have failings. So if you were to assemble a hero for yourself, what parts would you take from who and why? Say, like, if you were gonna crash 3 people together, you might even think about it as your it's a Lego fig. Who are you pulling from?
So one of my idols is a guy named Rick Rubin. He was a music producer who helped bring up the rap industry. He produced like LL Cool J. He worked with Run DMC, the Beastie Boys, and he works with all types of music now. But one of his things is that whenever something becomes mainstream, it's no longer good. Like, he wants to keep pushing things forward. He doesn't stay in one place. He wants to keep moving forward. The second one would be Don Quixote. I know he's a fictional character, but that's my favorite book. I love everything about Don Quixote. There's a quote, and I'll just finish talking about him with that. But he says, "Where does madness lie? Perhaps madness lies in too much sanity. Perhaps madness lies in letting go of your dreams. Perhaps, but maddest of all might be seeing the world as it is, and not as it should be." So anyway, I love Don Quixote. can't really think of a third person right now.
That's okay.
Soft
I didn't
skills
say
are
three.
Yeah.
I just gave that example. Now, have you, number one, Rick Rubin and gosh, he has a podcast with I'm blanking on his name right now. He's one of my favorite authors, but he has a podcast called Broken Record.
Okay.
Malcolm Gladwell, and Bruce Headlam. And it's awesome because what they do is they talk to artists, musical, and they just get deep and get behind what's going on. And listening to, listening to Rick Rubin and Malcolm Gladwell interview people is a lesson, not only from the people they're interviewing, but how they attack it. He also has a book, audio book out.
Yeah, I've got that.
Yeah,
I have that
too. What?
Have you listened to it?
Parts of it. I haven't got through it yet. I moved on to another one real quick because I got a book club. You know how it goes.
I talked to Mike yesterday, and he said he was listening to that book.
Okay. It's called what is it? It's Creative Act.
Creative Acts. That's it. Yeah.
And he approaches it all as a lifestyle. You know, that's great stuff.
Absolutely.
So, and I love that you brought in a fictional character because I think they can be heroes too.
Yeah.
The last one, and this is just for fun. Who do you find yourself quoting most often? Could be an author. I had some people give cartoon characters. I had one person said Clint Eastwood in Outlaw Josie Wales. Man's got to know his limitations. But for you, what's your favorite thing to quote? And it could be serious or it could be out there.
Mitch Hedberg. He is my favorite comedian, and his jokes apply to everyday situations. And it's just like somebody will say something, and I'm like, oh, there's a Mitch Hedberg joke about that. And so, yeah, Mitch Hedberg.
Okay.
Mitch altogether.
Okay, good to hear. So, man, so much good stuff here. And as if you're out there listening to this, check out the book. If you wanted a great example of divergent thinking and especially competitive thinking, his book, the 300 uses for a Nalgene bottle. But real quick, can you tell me about what the next in the series of 300 uses is?
Yeah, so the next one is coins. And so I had 367 ideas for Nalgene bottles, and coins I've realized are way more difficult because you can't manipulate them, like cut them up, and they don't have as many parts as a Nalgene bottle. So I think I'm at a 311 right now. But
well, you can cut them up, you just get arrested.
Yeah, exactly. So I have to kind of have a lot of disclaimers too in the uses.
There's a risk-taking piece in there.
There is.
Well, thank you for being here. Exciting. I love this conversation. I look to connecting with you more about creativity. Absolutely. If for everybody else, I'm next month, which is October, I'm doing a free lunch and learn on practical creativity. If you're curious, there's ways to find me. Follow Daniel on now. What's your handle in LinkedIn?
Uh-oh. You're asking me the tough questions.
Okay, search for Daniel Cape.
Yeah, Daniel Cape.
In LinkedIn.
There'll be a picture of me as a Nalgene bottle.
Yeah, the picture you as an Nalgene bottle. Let me see. Okay, can you send that to me? Yeah. We'll use that as the title for this.
Okay. All right.
Send that to me and I'll put that in there. But Thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening to us. And if you got questions, comments, concerns, reach out. We'd love to, for either me or Daniel, we'll answer you. Be sure to do all the things that you're supposed to do with podcasts, YouTube channel, subscribe, like, comment, do whatever, share it with people so that we get a broader reach. And with that, Daniel, thank you for spending time with me today.
Yeah, thanks. I wish we had about 8 more hours to talk about this. Thanks, John.